BCYF Inc. hosts a public annual financial plan meeting to educate the public about our plans for the coming fiscal year and to learn and to listen and learn from public feedback. We look forward to engaging with you this evening. Since our FY 2022 financial plan meeting, BCYF Inc. has had a tremendous year. We have hired our first president, Alicia Lee, who is doing a phenomenal job working with the BCYF Inc. team and leading the organization to live out its guiding values of race equity, community ownership, intergenerational leadership, and collective decision-making. We've onboarded a permanent board of directors, including five youth board members in alignment with the organization's purpose of ensuring youth leadership in the governance of BCYF Inc. We've provided funds to organizations across the city that are vital to the development and the success of our youth. Those funds include $2 million in support for summer programs across the city, prioritizing programs for older youth and programs led by people of color. We also launched BCYF Inc.'s first direct grant-making cycle through what we call the Grassroots Fund, which will provide over $5 million in grants and technical assistance to organizations with budgets of no more than $250,000. In addition to funding organizations that are serving our youth, BCYF Inc. was also founded to ensure that grassroots organizations that are deeply committed to youth but have not been funded in the past receive investments in their programs. To strengthen the infrastructure for grassroots organizations, BCYF Inc. provided direct support to Fusion Partnerships as a leading fiscal sponsor of grassroots organizations in this city. And we are in the process of onboarding a dedicated and talented staff to move BCYF Inc. into this fiscal year. We are quickly staffing up and we will have a fully staffed team by this fall. I'll now turn it over to John Morris, who will talk a little bit more about our financial plan. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Tonight's meeting is focused on BCYF Inc.'s financial plan for fiscal year 2023. We will review the organization's priorities for the fiscal year, the three components of the budget: grant making, community engagement, and technical assistance, and last, administration. Following this meeting, we will take the public's feedback and have the feedback influence the final budget for fiscal year 2023 that will be voted on at the board meeting of June 28th, 2022. As a framework for tonight's meeting, we'll be using the city's ordinance's three budget categories of grant making and technical assistance, public or community engagement, and administration of funds. The ordinance also spells out the amount of BCYF Inc.'s funds that are allocated to each of the budget areas. At least 80% of the funds for grant making and technical assistance, up to 5% for public engagement, and up to 15% for administration. Tonight, we will have a staff member and a board member to provide an overview of the budget area's priorities for the year. And we will end with the detail of the three budget areas being provided by Kira Ritter, Vice President of Administration and Finance. Now, we will begin with tonight's presentation by Alicia and Larry providing the vision and goals for BCYF Inc.'s grant making and technical assistance.
Thank you so much, Mr. John, and good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to bring Adam Jackson to the stage just to give a little context before we begin this formal part of our presentation around how you'll be able to engage with us tonight.
All right, thank you, Alicia. Peace and blessings, family. My name is Adam Jackson. I am the communications lead for the Baltimore Children Youth Fund. And before we deep dive into today's discussion and conversation and hearing, I wanted to make sure that you understood how you could be directly involved in today's conversation. Today is not just going to be us talking at you. You will have plenty of opportunity throughout today's conversation to give feedback, ask questions, and to be involved with this discussion. So there's 3 ways you can do that. First is the most obvious way. We've all used the chat box in every Zoom meeting that we've ever been in. So if you want to give feedback in the chat box, feel free to do so, because today's webinar is being recorded. And anything you put in the chat, we will have direct access to after today's information session and hearing. Secondly, the 2 other ways you can be directly involved in today's conversation is if you look at the bottom of your screen, that little black bar there, you should see the raise hand function. When you click on the raise hand button, what happens is we can see that you've raised your hand, you have a question, you want to give feedback, and you want to verbally communicate your question or feedback. And so when we get to the Q&A portion at the end of tonight's presentation, I will be able to call on you and allow you to speak directly into your microphone. You can give verbal communication on today's hearing. And the third way that you can do, you can also give feedback. And if you have a written question, is that you can actually click on the Q&A button. It's right next to the raise hand button. So you click on the Q&A button, it pops up, you type in your question. It helps us keep track of who's asking what question in what order. So that helps us make sure that we get your question answered during tonight's session. We're going to make plenty of space at the end of the presentation, and I will be conducting the Q&A. So again, those 3 ways is in the chat function. Make sure you put your feedback in the chat. If you have feedback, use the raise hand feature if you want to verbally communicate your question or feedback. And thirdly is the Q&A button. When you click on the Q&A button, you can type in your question and you can give us your question during tonight's session. You can put that information in throughout tonight's session. So as people are talking, if you have a question, type it in and I'll make sure I get to you when we get to that part of tonight's program. Thank you so very much and have fun. Back to Alicia.
Thank you so much, Adam. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alicia Lee, and I am the president of the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. And I'd like to introduce, there we go. Hi, Larry.
Good evening. My name is Larry Simmons, and I'm a board member of the Baltimore Children Youth Fund.
So as Mr. John advented just a few moments ago, we've divided our presentation into 3 categories. And we're here tonight to update the public on our draft plan for grant making for fiscal year 2023.
Since July 1st, 2020, BCYF has committed or deployed over $20 million in grant making and technical assistance to continuing grantees and aligned grant making. These funds have supported dozens of youth programs and youth serving organizations and hundreds of young people throughout our city. This fiscal year, we're excited to have launched the Grassroots Fund in May. We'll be providing $150,000 in grants to over 30 grassroots organizations in the form of multi-year general operating grants. Our grant making and technical assistance priorities for FY 2023 fall into 2 categories: direct grant making and technical assistance. The board has made a commitment to devote 25 cents of every grant dollar to technical assistance.
Thanks, Larry. So just a little dive into technical assistance comes next. And I just wanted to throw out before we get there that this investment is a critical part of BCYF's plan to operationalize our values by investing in the capacity building and technical assistance for grantees. Take it away, Larry.
Thank you. So technical assistance can be broadly defined as any specialized service or skill that a nonprofit organization program does not currently possess, but may need in order to operate more effectively. BCYF is committed to providing TA to challenge the traditional and historical harmful power dynamics of the philanthropic sector. Offering TA that incorporates the core values of BCYF shifts the dynamics of grant making by empowering communities, uplifting youth voice, and strengthening grantee organizational capacity to ensure that the delivery of equitable and effective programming to our young people. The TA plan incorporates these core values, eliminating barriers to funding confronting many local grassroots organizations, creating more opportunities for capacity building and technical assistance to strengthen community organizations, and building community with local service providers. This year, BCYF provided over 100 hours of technical assistance to support organizations in applying to the Grassroots Fund. In FY23, we will continue to offer technical assistance that provides application support, grant writing basics, narrative writing, and sharing your story, and even technical support for the new BCYF grant portal.
So that's the 25% of our grant making budget. The other 75% will be spent supporting Baltimore's youth serving sector. Unlike traditional grant making entities, BCYF is committed to authentic community engagement, and our strategy and grants decisions have been shaped by a range of Baltimoreans. BCYF partners with Baltimore residents themselves to decide how funds are spent and partners with other organizations that share our values. We will be deploying $14 million in direct grant-making dollars to support Baltimore City's youth development sector in the fiscal year 2023. These are community accountable organizations in Baltimore City that are serving young people through the age of 24. Here you can see this development over time, that this is a large departure from the amount of spending that we've done in the past. And we're very excited about this. And our financial vice president, Kira Ritter, will be able to go in detail as to how we're able this year to offer more funds. But we wanted you to see this shift, right? We are super excited about the idea that at BCYF, a core principle, right? Of course, designed by our ordinance, but also a core principle of our giving is that at least 80% of our income each year is spent in direct funds, direct fundraising, direct grant making to Baltimore City sector. So our direct grant making is divided into 4 categories. First, the Grassroots Fund. Now, it's important to remember that nationally, only about 2% of all philanthropic dollars are given to grassroots organizations. And this is despite the research that demonstrates that grassroots organizations often have the most potent community solutions. This trend continues to persist nationally and of course locally as well. And so the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund's Grassroots Fund addresses those traditional gaps in our landscape that really disadvantage grassroots organizations by providing unrestricted funding for grassroots organizations that are Baltimore-based, youth-serving, all in support of their organization's overall mission. So general operating support, multi-year gifts. In addition to this support, as you're aware, this is coupled with a really rigorous capacity building or technical assistance package. The second fund is the Innovation Fund. So BCYF aims to invest in organizations whose work is grounded in innovation that is defined by BCYF as creating solutions that are born from priority, community validated wisdom and applied to community identified problems. The Innovation Fund supports BCYF's core principle of incubating effective methodologies and frameworks that support priority youth and youth serving organizations. So these investments can also support emergent and unmet community needs. For example, supporting young people during the COVID crisis or transitioning programs from hybrid to back to in-person, and the needs and the funds that will need to support that kind of work. The Innovation Fund will launch an RFP during the 2020-2023 grant season. The third bucket of funding is the Aligned Grant-Making Fund. So these are opportunities to create larger grant-making opportunities, like in the past, the Summer Funding Collaborative, to join, which allows us to join with area Baltimore funders to align application processes and resources in support of summer programming for young people through the age of 24. And finally, the President's Fund, which is a small discretionary fund intended to be responsive to community needs throughout the year. $14 million is in our budget for fiscal year 2023, $14 million that will be divided in this way here. So we see $5.5 million for the Grassroots Fund, $5 million for the Innovation Fund to support community accountable organizations, $2.5 million in the Aligned Grant Making to support strategic and systemic investments, and also collaborative investments, and $1 million in the President's Fund. I'd like you to take a look at what that means in terms of people and organizational power. In fiscal year 2023, we are planning to bring on 67 new grantees, 40 Grassroots Fund grantees by elevating the Grassroots Fund to 5.5 million, 20 new Innovation Fund grantees in our new Innovation Fund, 2 grantees in aligned grant making, and 5 President's Fund grantees. 67 new organizations that will have support from the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. And it's important to think about what this looks like for the future. We anticipate by the end of the current fiscal year that we'll have 43 grantees, which would then make it so that next year there's 105 organizations that are receiving financial dollars and support for their programs throughout the city of Baltimore. And in 2 years from now, we will see, at the end of that fiscal year, we will see 159 organizations that are receiving support from the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. And now I'd like to turn it over to our Vice President of Community Engagement and Strategic Partnership, Kiera Iriarte Amin.
Thank you, Alicia and Larry. So today we're going to discuss community engagement. So BCYF Inc. was established to ensure that there is meaningful community engagement and input into the goals and activities of the organization. The role of community engagement is to ensure that BCYF Inc. is grounded in and remains responsive to the needs and interests of Baltimore's youth-serving organizations, and range of partners across the city, in particular grassroots organizations. So each community engagement activity that we're going to discuss this afternoon all surround and support BCYF's vision of racial equity, intergenerational leadership, community ownership, and collective decision-making. So BCYF Inc.'s priority for community engagement for this fiscal year are to facilitate the People's Assemblies, supporting the President's Fund, recruiting and onboarding new board members, and to support the Avis Ransom Institute. Next slide. So the People's Assembly. BCYF is committed to ensuring that the community has meaningful mechanisms of engagement and influence over the direction of the organization. Given a commitment to liberatory practice, BCYF has taken great interest in forms of democratic governance that include communities that are typically excluded from decisions and how resources are distributed. So BCYF will be convening in-person and virtual public assemblies that will provide residents in Baltimore an opportunity to provide their perspective on a wide range of issues, including what the priorities for BCYF should be, an assessment of the current youth service landscape, and what are promising activity, practices, and efforts to build on. On the next slide, you'll see the opportunities for People's Assembly that are coming up next week and the week after. So on June 21st, there's an opportunity for a virtual People's Assembly. So please, if you have opportunity, please share the link that we're going to share within the chat. And also on June 25th, there is an in-person activity for everyone. So please, that's going to be located at Cherry Hill Elementary School. Wonderful opportunities to have your voice heard in what you want the vision for BCYF and our priorities to be for the next 3 years. The next item we'll discuss will be the President's Fund. The President's Fund aligns with the BCYF mission, vision, and values and offers flexibility to address pressing issues at the discretion of the President. Through the President's Fund, our President will select community initiatives that align with the mission and value of BCYF. Next slide, please. Also, the onboarding and offboarding of our Board of Directors. So the BCYF Community Engagement Team developed and implemented the process to select and onboard new board members. The new board member selection process was conducted transparently and culminated in a public announcement. In December of 2021, BCYF onboarded 4 permanent board members. Go to the next slide. These new permanent board members are Kiana Gorham, Lisa Malak, Marcus Pollock, and Larry Simmons. They join the transition board members that are continuing service with BCYF. Kirsten Allen, who's the vice chair, Catherine Benson Jones, Jacqueline Caldwell, our secretary, Dion Cartwright, our board chair, and Mr. John Morris, our treasurer. In fall of 2022, BCYF will begin the process for recruiting additional permanent board members as some of our transition board members conclude service and their terms end. Speaking to the value of intergenerational leadership that BCYF has, we have begun the Avis Ransom Institute. So what's that? In addition to joining the adult board members, youth board members were recruited, trained, and onboarded. So BCYF wants to empower young people to be responsible stewards of power and resources. To achieve that goal, the Avis Ransom Institute has 3 objectives for youth and young adults. Introduce youth to a framework for advocacy and leadership that will equip them with the tools to develop an advocacy campaign that is community-based. Learn and be able to apply techniques of self-actualization to strengthen their ability to advocate for themselves and their community, and to gain knowledge of civic and social landscape to effectively navigate those environments in ways that are empowering for themselves and their community. So within the Institute, there are 3 additional main components to this program. It is instructional. So this will consist of classroom instruction. The instructors will curate reading materials, videos, and other media that will be the basis for group discussion. Second will be community immersion. Youth will be connected to people and institutions in the community that will provide social and historical context on advocacy efforts in Baltimore. And then third, the pipeline connection. Based on the interest of the youth in the program, they will be connected with opportunities to serve in leadership capacities and be provided with the support needed to be effective in their desired opportunities. So on the next slide, you'll see our 4 youth board members from the Avis Ransom Institute. Lene Drake, John Gray, Lewis William III, and Darius Malone. We look forward to working and helping to support them grow as they provide service as board members with BCYF. So thank you.
Peace, everybody. Hello, hello. My name is Lewis Williams III. As you previously saw, I'm one of the students with the Avis Ransom Institute and youth board member here.
And I am Kira Ritter, the Vice President of Finance and Administration. Good evening, everyone.
Yes, now I would just like to open the floor just for a second. So we're about to move into the administrative budget, but we've already heard from the grant making and community engagement priorities. I think it's important to remember that the administrative duties of any organization, but particularly BCYF, is the engine that allows for the grant making and the community engagement objectives to be achieved at all. Therefore, I think the administrative budget directly contributes to BCYF's ability to support high quality services to youth all throughout the city. And personally, anytime I think about my work with BCYF, I often think about the plethora of grassroots organizations that have been in operations for decades, doing phenomenal work for our youth all over on a shoestring budget, only having a couple $100s to do all the amazing things that they do. And as we've said many times before, it's BCYF's objective to allow these community-centered organizations to have an equal chance at being funded just as their more mainstream counterparts are. So it's only through this strong administration budgeting that this redistribution of funds can occur. And in order to talk us through that budget, I'll let Kiera take it away.
Thank you so much, Lewis. So the budget that we'll be presenting this evening, as Lewis shared, really supports the mission, vision, and charge of the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. The budget meets the requirements of the ordinance disbursement of funds by percentages, and that is at least 80% of the budget is committed to direct grants and technical assistance. Up to 15% of the budget may be used for administration of the fund for overhead, and up to 5% of the budget may be used for public engagement, which we sometimes also call community engagement. We use those terms interchangeably. I'm going to walk through what is a $25 million budget this year. That's an increase over the FY22 budget of approximately $17 million. And that is because in past years, we did not fully deploy all of the BCYF funds that were in the coffers based on the city ordinance as we were building our infrastructure. You often heard us say that we did not want to overload our internal systems by overextending ourselves. We're excited to be in a position to be able to deploy those additional funds in FY23. I'm going to share my screen and walk through what is, again, a $25 million budget for this year. Just a minute, please. Alicia, would you mind sharing the slide version? I have a security firewall. Thank you so much. Okay, we are going to start with the columns above, columns B, C, D, and E. Column B is the administration bucket. That's the up to 15% that I referenced earlier. Column C is community engagement or public engagement, and that is the up to 5% that I referenced. Column D is grant making, and that is the at least 80% of our budget for a grand total. Looking at line 7, all of our funds for BCYF come from city funds. And so we are requesting, again, $3.2 million in administration, $1.1 million in community engagement, and almost $21 million in grant making for a total of $25.2 million. That will be our revenue. Those funds are available to us at the city, and we draw down as we deploy funds. Then we get into our expenditures. Our first line are salaries, broken down again into the 3 categories: admin, community engagement, and grant making. So in administration, salary and associated fringe benefits, that almost $4 million plus $400,000 in fringe benefits under admin for our overhead. Under community engagement, about $500,000 in salaries and $128,000 in associated fringe benefits. And then grant making, those who specifically work with grantees to deploy those funds, $857,000 and approximately $200,000 in associated fringe benefits, for a total of $2.7 million in total salaries and $733,000 in fringe benefits. Moving to the next section are our professional fees. This is typically associated with consultants. We have an independent accountant that performs an audit every year for BCYF, and that's $22,500 in the administration category. We spend a total of approximately $180,000 in legal fees, and that's for general counsel plus associated counsel that we require and that we need. And that is a total of $180,000. Approximately $10,000 for marketing and communications under administrative overhead. We're going to spend $150,000 approximately in stipends, and that's between community engagement and grant making. So that includes stipends for those who are attending the Avis Ransom Institute, those who are on the grant review panel or the external review panel that review applications from grantees. We have some focus groups, a number of other opportunities as well. And we do believe in compensating people for their time and their expertise when they support BCYF. We have $44,500 in IT services under administrative overhead. And then we have $484,000 in management consultants and admin, approximately $209,000 in community engagement, and $438,000 in grant making, supporting grant making, for a total of $1.1 million. Now, if you'll recall, BCYF was originally a consultant-based organization, and we've begun to transition into staff. This number has decreased significantly over the last year and will continue to decrease as we continue to onboard staff and offboard a number of those consultants. Our next line is for advertising and promotions, and that's approximately $30,000 under community engagement. And we'll use those funds to promote when we have grant cycles opening up, when we have opportunities for grant reviewers to be a part, the Avis Ransom Institute. Many of you have been seeing social media ads pop up. That's what that line represents. Our next line is banking and payroll fees, and that's a total of approximately $34,000 across each category, directly related to the employees that support those functions. And then BCYF carries its own insurance policy. Many of our grantees know that we often talk about insurance, and that those policies combined are roughly $25,000 included in administrative overhead. Lines 31 and 32 are directly related to our vision for BCYF, and that is the $14 million that you heard about earlier in direct grants to grantees, and the $4.7 million in technical assistance. That is both for those who are BCYF grantees and also community-based technical assistance, because the goal of BCYF is not just to support those who are getting financial support or a grant from BCYF, but really to increase the capacity and the technical assistance of all youth serving organizations in Baltimore in order to support the young people who attend those programs. Our next line is meals and catering, and that's a total of $22,000 broken across grant making for our grantee convenings and other events related to grant making, $10,000 for community engagement, and $6,000 for administrative overhead for internal costs. Our next line are membership dues, and that's $18,500, and that's in our general overhead as well, and that's to join local organizations such as Maryland Philanthropy Network, ABFI on a national level, and to be part of the national conversation about how BCYF is deploying funds in a way that is equitable and in support of young people across the city. We have $3,000 in the budget for postage, stretched across the three categories, $7,000 in printing and copying costs, again, stretched across three categories. And then our next line is rent. BCYF is in a hybrid environment, and that's why our rental costs are only about $45,000. And that's because our overhead is only roughly $25,000 at this point in time. And then we rent additional space under community engagement and grant making when we have convenings where we bring folks from the public in to be a part of BCYF activities. Our next line is professional development and trainings, and we have $175,000 in the budget. This was actually a line that last year we increased based on feedback from the community that they wanted those who were working for BCYF to really be well trained and developed in youth development, in equity matters, and in doing the work that supports our grantees. Our next line is technology, with most of it internal, approximately $132,000 in overhead, a small amount in community engagement, and then $40,000 for our grants management system, which our grantees used during this last round in May to apply for grants, and that our grant review panel used in reading and scoring those applications, for a total of approximately $173,000. The next line is furniture, $25,000, and again, that's administrative overhead. And then our next line is also general office supplies, $15,000 stretched across the three categories for internal supplies. Again, we are a hybrid environment. And then also for our community events for $5,000 and $2,500 for our grantee convenings. We have $2,000 in the budget for subscriptions and publications, and $25,000 in the budget for telecommunications and internet. Our next line is travel, and our total budget is $47,000, and that's split between administrative overhead, community engagement, and grant making. And travel includes, number one, we know we do site visits for all of our grantees, but also supporting those who are traveling to BCYF events and making sure that travel is not a barrier, the cost of travel is not a barrier to them receiving services or being part of our programming. particularly when it comes to our Avis Ransom Institute and other community engagement opportunities. And then our last line is operational support fees, and that's $239,000 in overhead, $82,000 in community engagement, and $512,000 in overhead, for a total of $834,000. This includes our management services contracts that support the back office administration of BCYF. Again, this number will begin to change as we begin to staff up, but this ensures that we are in regulation and compliance, number one, when it comes to the administrative overhead. But for the grant making, it also supports some of those aligned grant making opportunities where we work with other funders to ensure that BCYF is not, due to the reporting requirements of BCYF, that we are not burdening others by providing our own TA to support some of those reporting requirements that BCYF has, and that our grantees, again, have the support that they need. So at the end of each column, again, column B, the administration column, that's $3.2 million. Column C, community engagement, that's $1.1 million. And grant making, that's $20.9 million, for that total of $25 million. And we talked again earlier about those percentages according to the ordinance and also according to our values. And our grant making budget for this year, we are anticipating that roughly 83% of our budget will go again to grant making and technical assistance. 4.4% of the budget will go toward community engagement, that public engagement, and under 13% of our budget will be in administrative overhead. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just to close this out, thank you very much, Kira, for running through the budget for us. I think it's just something that I like to think about when I look at this particularly. And it's said by John Brothers that most healthy nonprofit organizations allocate about 25 to 28% of their budget to administrative costs specifically. According to the city ordinance, our organization, BCYF, is only allowed to use 15% of the budget for admin fees. But if you see at the very bottom, we use closer to 13%. I bring up this nuance in order to clarify that we're doing everything in our power to balance getting the most support out to community organizations as soon as possible, while also using as little money as possible for us to administrate that, to do our work and get that out to them, despite using far less than typical nonprofit organizations. So that balance is something that we're keen on and we're trying our best to execute on. And I'll throw it over to Adam.
Thank you, Louis. I'm sorry, before we get to Adam, I do see a question in the chat that was asked to answer. From Aaron, is there an approved vendor list that prioritizes youth and grassroots community organizations capable of performing some of the consulting functions, catering, IT support to promote a true ecosystem approach? I'm so glad you asked this question. So one of the things that BCYF did actually in last fiscal year was to talk about the importance of our contracting reflecting our values to address exactly what you have raised. And so it isn't that there's an approved vendor list, but that we have priorities and standards that we use and consider when we are accepting proposals in order to do the work of BCYF. We are not just about our values when it comes to our grant making, but also our values in how we operate internally. And so what's critical to, I think, share with everyone is that we believe in, one, supporting those who are young people and grassroots operations, two, continue the ecosystem of BCYF. This includes using past grantees as consultants and contractors. It includes, again, young people. It includes, again, looking at the values of organizations before we spend our money. Talk about voting with your feet. This is about voting with our feet and our dollars. And so we absolutely do that.
All right, I think we're going to move to officially move to Q&A. Appreciate that response, Kira. So again, we have now reached the most important section of tonight's program, and that is the Q&A and public feedback portion of tonight's hearing. So again, just similar to how you would think about commenting on public dollars and giving feedback on public dollars, because BCYF is a publicly funded entity. We want to give you, the viewer, an opportunity to ask questions and give feedback on what has been presented. We know it's been a lot of information. So if you have any clarifying questions, if you have anything that you were confused about, if there's something that you didn't understand necessarily, that is why we are here tonight. You have all of the big players in the organization to answer any questions you may have. So I want to take this opportunity to remind you of how to give your question. The first main way we would like you to write your question is in the Q&A box. Again, if you look at the bottom of your screen, your Zoom window, you see a Q&A button. Just click on that button and you'll be able to type your question into that box. We ask you to use the Q&A button because that helps us track your question. Aaron, we appreciate you putting it in the chat. Of course, if you want to put your question in the chat, we're not going to stop you from doing that because, this is America. You're a free person to do that. But we hope that you use the Q&A button. So type in the Q&A box your question if you have a question. The second way you can ask a question is, of course, to just raise your hand. The beauty of being able to raise your hand means that I can allow you to speak, we can unmute you, and then you can verbally ask your question or give your feedback. So if you don't have a question per se, but you want to give feedback on anything you've seen or heard this evening, feel free to do that as well. And the third and final way is the chat box. So if you have any commentary that you would like to share, I just want to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded, so we will have access to the chat log afterwards. So if you have anything you would like us to know and keep track of after today's meeting has concluded, we will have access to that afterwards as well. So I do not see anything in the Q&A box, the chat, or anyone raising their hand yet. So I'm just going to tell you that you need to raise your hand if you want to speak. Type it in the Q&A box if you want us to see your question, or put it in the chat. And for people who are here, this is a great opportunity for us to talk about the People's Assembly. The People's Assembly, if you have not registered for both of those, I need you to click on bcyfund.org, go to those links in the chat and register for our upcoming People's Assembly. It's in the name, it's for you, the people. We want you to come out and give feedback on what you think the future of BCYF should be in terms of the funding priorities. Every 3 years, according to the ordinance that created the Youth Fund, every 3 years, BCYF does a needs assessment. A needs assessment means that we are trying to assess what the institution should fund and prioritize. And instead of having us do it, we would much rather have Baltimore City residents influence that process because it is funded by your tax dollars. Therefore, you should have the most say in the priorities of the fund. So all you got to do is go to bcyfund.org/events and you can register for both sessions. I want to remind people for the in-person event, we have free breakfast, free lunch, free childcare. It's going to be about 3 hours, and we want you to come through, holler at the family, come chill with us, come be with us. We know all the virtual events. I know Kieta knows all about these dozens of virtual events that we have done, but we'd love to see your beautiful smiling face at Cherry Hill Elementary Middle School. So thank you so much again for being here tonight, and please register for the in-person assembly or the virtual assembly at the website, bcyfund.org. So we have a question in the Q&A box here. And excuse me if I mispronounce your name, Ms. Shalene Wallace. Hello, I am new to the program. How can you be a member or apply to be on the panel to prepare myself to apply for next year? Who wants to take that?
Sounds like a grant making question, I think. So it also sounds like a board member question. So I'll answer both. Yes, that sounds like a little bit of both. So there's so many ways, if you're not already affiliated with BCYF, that you can be a part of BCYF. I'll start just thinking about grant making and the timeline there. So next winter, in fiscal year 2023, we will deploy a request for grant proposals for the Innovation Fund and for the Grassroots Fund. There will be a robust pre-application technical assistance to help proceed that as well. We'll also be developing some new programming around technical assistance that are open, yes, to our grantees, our current grantees, but also open to any youth-serving organization. So that's one way to get in the mix of BCYF. And then I'm going to throw it over to our Vice President, Kieta, to talk a little bit about how to get in the mix and be a board member.
Sure. So last fall, we had a process, in the winter, we had a process where we recruited, there was an all-call place to community. There was an application, and it asked a few questions about your interest in grassroots organization and racial equity, And just to make sure that your visions and who you are and your character align with BCYF. We'll be doing something like that similar in the fall as we recruit for new board members. So if you're not on our listserv or on our newsletter right now, please be intentional about that. And you'll be able to see some of those calls for board members that will come out in the fall, because we will be recruiting for about 5 new board members at the end of the year.
And I think Kira had something to add.
I wanted to go back to something that Adam said, where he talked about the People's Assembly, and he talked about free breakfast, free lunch, free childcare. It's not free. It's at no cost to you. This is part of the BCYF values. We do not want this to be a reason why you cannot come out. It's why things like this are so important, that our budget matches our values, that we remove barriers for people to participate in the process. And to go back to the question again that I love that someone asked earlier, you know, when we're looking at who are our vendors, who is providing the food for the event, yes, we're about returning those dollars to community. So, you know, as a finance person, often you don't get to get excited about things. I got very excited about that. So I wanted to be able to share. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kira. Yeah, things cost money, people. Things definitely cost money. So it's free to you. It's no cost to you, but definitely come through. We want to make sure that if you have young children, especially, that you can come through, give feedback. And if you have children that want to participate, it's the Youth Fund. So we want them to be a part of it as well. So I think the username is FT Burden. And the question is, what is the anticipated grant period? I'm not, if you could clarify what you mean by that. When you say grant period, do you mean in general for the different pots of money being presented? And somebody could probably ask that question. And please clarify if I didn't capture your question, FT Burden. But yes, what is the anticipated grant period?
Absolutely. So I'll speak about the Grassroots Fund. The Grassroots Fund is a 3-year multi-year general operating gift grant. Sorry. So that's 3 years. So the grant period begins for this upcoming group of grantees in September, and then they will have 3 years to receive $50,000, totaling $150,000 across 3 years. The Innovation Fund, those components on whether that will be a 2-year grant or a 3-year grant, we will unveil that when we reveal the request for grant proposals. But BCYF has made a firm commitment around general operating support that is multi-year. So you can attest to that. I hope that answers that question.
All right. Okay, so I'm still looking around for raised hands and questions in the Q&A box. I want to take this opportunity while you are, because we have a very cerebral crowd. You're trying to digest all the wonderful information that you just got this evening. So we just want to take the time while you digest and remind you of all the excellent resources on the BCYF website. If you actually take an opportunity while you are here right now, you can actually go to the BCYF website and you will see all of these beautiful, awesome curated videos of all the excellent TA we've done during this year. Ranging from anti-violence to youth development, and also all of the technical assistance we did this year relating to building organizations. So if you are an organization that wants to know more about budgeting, developing a culture for your nonprofit, all of these excellent videos are available on our website at bcyfund.org. All you got to do is go to the top under events, just click on media, you'll find all those videos. I want to make sure that people know that these resources are available to you in the public. You don't have to go very far to find all the excellent work that BCYF is doing and all the investments we're making in technical assistance. We take it very seriously and we want you to take advantage of it. All right, so I'm still monitoring the chat box here. I will talk to you and I will share my beautiful voice with you all evening. I'll give you about another 5 or 10 minutes when I hold space for people who have questions, concerns, and are interested in what is happening with BCYF in this coming year. I want to remind you again to sign up for the People's Assembly. We called it the People's, we didn't call it a public assembly. We didn't call it a meeting. We didn't call it a gathering. We called it the People's Assembly because we wanted to make sure that the residents here in Baltimore understood that BCYF takes your input seriously, and we use the input of Baltimore City residents in everything that we do. And so we want to encourage you again, it's next week. 21st is the virtual assembly and the 25th is the in-person People's Assembly. So both of these events are free at no cost to you. When you register, you'll be able to tell us if you're bringing young folks with you, a young adult, or if you're just coming as an adult. And there'll be many opportunities for you to participate. If you've been to any of our design sessions before COVID, we had people come through and gave us a wide variety of feedback, and that guided the work of BCYF up until now. And so these things are not just perfunctory public events. These are actually vital to the institution and the guidance that we're taking from you moving forward. So whatever you give us there will be what BCYF uses to color our funding priorities for the next several years. So again, it is extremely important that you come through, and I will be sending you many emails because I do the comms, I see who reads the emails. So I'll be able to see if you register. So make sure you register at bcyfund.org. Go to the links in the chat if you haven't registered yet. All right. So I am looking, all right. Okay, I don't see any questions. So I'm gonna give you one more opportunity. This is the last call. We're gonna call it the final call, the last call for you to put in your questions in the Q&A box to raise your hand if you have a question, you wanna verbally say it or put it in the chat. I'm gonna be taking a look, or I'm gonna be looking at all three lists to make sure before we end this evening. And of course, we wanna respect your time. It's beautiful, it's a sunny day outside. It's not raining right now. I heard there's gonna be some scattered thunderstorms tonight, but we wanna make sure we give you the appropriate amount of time to ask any of your questions, all right? Okay, Aaron, Billy, Donna, Cameron, Kim, all right. Natalie, Rashad, Shalene, Stacy, Sue, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, box or raise your hand, all right? All right, okay, Donna, you have a question. I see you have a question. If you wanna raise your hand, if you want, would you like me to unmute you or would you like to type it? All right, the pregnant pause. We wait. Okay, I will unmute you. Okay, so Miss Donna Bruce, give me 1 second. I will allow you to speak and you can unmute yourself. All right, Donna, so you click the unmute button. There you go.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that because this may be a silly question. Okay, so I'm doing work in the community already with the youth through my cosmetology, More Than a Shop, Healing City, all that great stuff. However, I want to know, do you have any innovative workshops to help me legitimize the work that I'm doing so I can now be paid, if that makes sense? That's just the straight to it. I'm doing a lot of free work and I want to do it full time and I want to get paid. So I found you guys in my email. I must have signed up. So I don't even know what I'm on, but it's interesting. So that's my question, if it makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, Donna. And as a person who's also been in the same boat where you are, where I was doing work at a grassroots level, and I wanted to operationalize that. I wanted to build an institution around it. I wanted to be able to hire other folks and expand the program that I was doing. And I had that community support, and I needed to pick up some skills, right? So I could go into nonprofit management with some confidence. And so what I can say to you is absolutely make sure that you are just receiving all of our materials going forward. But I want to turn you over to two things. Number one, this is why BCYF's commitment to technical assistance at 25% is so critical. We know that many of us that are working in grassroots spaces do not have the management experience in terms of nonprofit management, board governance, the things that you need to be able to erect a nonprofit business with confidence. So we know that, right? And so the technical assistance that we're offering offers that kind of support in building logic models for your program so that you can communicate and build stakeholders, and connecting you possibly with fiscal sponsors or fiscal sponsorship opportunities, and giving you some knowledge that you can help to make your organization erect itself and fly. And the second piece is, I would also encourage you to check out the resource that Adam shared. Our website is a resource. There are just hours and hours of learning opportunities that have already taken place, that have been recorded. And we're going to be building out some more program to really kind of, operationalize these pieces here. But there's so much richness. If you need help thinking about recruitment, if you want to talk about fiscal sponsorship, that's on there. If you want some help with metrics, all of those kinds of things, a lot of that information is available to you, completely free to you.
Wow,
right?
that's
But it's available to you. Yeah, so those are two great resources. So stay in touch with us as those events unfold, the new technical assistance series that we'll be offering to the public unfolds, we want to make sure that you get registered quick, but also don't feel like you can't use the resources that have already been provided.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Oh, thank you, Donna. Thank you for the work that you do with young people in the city.
All right, thank you so much, Donna. All right, so I am going to give we have another question from Sue Malone. Could you share more about the plans BCYF has to uplift the stories of their grantees to leadership and community at large, to support them as they build their networks and exposure?
That's a great question. So I can start, and then if someone has other pieces, this is something we think about a lot. BCYF really wants to position itself not just as an ATM, not just as a place where you can get a cash disbursement, but as a resource to the city and, of course, to your organizations outside of the financial piece. And so this amplification of your stories, as we build our platform and brand, we're thinking of that in service to the youth serving sector. So I will say that already we have an incredible comms team already, which is why many of you are here tonight and know about this event, who do things like grantee spotlights and things like that in our newsletter and all of our social media platforms. We've just hired a new director of communications who will begin shortly. And one of the reasons that we hired that person was because in their interview, they talked, sure, about the metrics and the tools and the functions, but they talked about getting into the community and amplifying the stories of our grantees and our non-grantees, right? Our friends, our close and proximate friends. So we'll have much more to share in the coming months about vehicles that we will build and create in collaboration with you all as well, of course, right? With your feedback and input along the way that will help us to elevate your story. Any elevation of our story is intentional around elevating the story, the collective story of what youth development is in Baltimore City.
Yeah, and just to add, Alicia, we also do grantee spotlights at our board meetings. So we try to, take time to highlight some of the great programs that we've supported through BCYF Inc. at our board meetings. So please join our board meetings. They're always public, and you'll get an opportunity to hear from some of our grantees on there and maybe even be featured.
Mm.
Yeah, and as Vice President of Community Engagement, Strategic Partnerships, it's really important for, myself in this role to be present at community events and to support community however it needs to be supported at those events, or, helping to plan and capacity building. When we say that word, sometimes the jargon gets in the way, but yeah, nonprofit coaching, like just helping to support with the growth of your organization and wherever that means and however that fits within your organization. So at BCYF, we are very intentional about that work. And as we grow and as we begin to support more organizations and we're more visible, you'll be able to see us in community more.
All right, thank you so much, Sue, for your excellent questions. See, I told y'all had good questions. You just cerebral. You was just digesting the information before you ask the question. I see. All right, so we're going to give one more.
I do want to throw out two, just to be more specific about some of the professional learning opportunities that we have coming. I want to throw out two initiatives that will start at the beginning of the calendar year for 2023. One is the Learning Lab, right? So the BCYF Learning Lab, we will be offering incredibly robust, but also dynamic learning experiences, both in person and virtually, that explore our racial equity framework. So this is a framework that BCYF is rooting a lot of its work. Racial equity, of course, is a term that in the last few years has come under, I would say, great popular, is very popular, but also is even more misunderstood maybe than before as people begin to define it on their own. So we want to share our definition of racial equity, and that connects as well to our learning and evaluation framework, as well as our youth development framework. So we're going to be diving into those together as a community, staff, board, and Baltimore City as well. So we want to make sure that folks are looking forward to that. And then the second piece is our micro-credentialing program that we're going to begin. So when you talk about even just a financial skill of reading a balance sheet, there are a few other skills in there that you got to have before you start there. And I know when I was a Grassroots founder, right? And folks would say, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that. I was like, well, where will I build the skills? Where will I find the small discrete skills that I can compound on top of each other so that I can feel confident as the leader of a nonprofit organization, or even a nonprofit project, right? That may be situated under a fiscal sponsor, because you want to be a good customer too, right? So that you know exactly what's happening. So that kind of empowerment comes from, of course, knowledge. And so the micro-credentialing program is going to be a program, we're calling it hashtag #BeCreds, Be Credible, right? So you can gain nonprofit management skills and youth development skills, small incremental skills that are modular. You can stack them on top of each other to gain greater skill and facility in finance or in evaluation or in recruiting, whatever the skills that we decide together are the most critical, right? That we're going to be able to offer that outside of going back to school and getting a nonprofit management degree, which many of us have done, right? Then a lot of folks get left out in the cold. It's like, where's the opportunity for me to build these skills while I still manage the incredible work I'm doing with young people? So we haven't seen any opportunities available, so we're going to create one. So you can look out for that hashtag #BeCred, be credible with your community, right? Build these skills so that you can move forward with confidence, not just with BCYF, but also with multiple stakeholders throughout the city. So that's coming too. And we want you to get excited about these learning opportunities, this opportunity to really see, to use this knowledge and to disperse the knowledge freely, free to you, disperse the knowledge freely so that you can elevate the work you're doing with young people.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for that awesome information. All right, so we're going to do just a few more minutes to see if anyone else has any more questions or feedback. You don't have to just have a question. You can just give feedback on what you've seen. If you want to say, man, that looks great, feel free to tell us. We want to hear from you. So I'm going to be looking at the chat again, chat box, the Q&A box, or raise your hand if you would like to ask a question like Donna did earlier. Feel free to do so. While we're waiting on people to gather their questions and gather their feedback, I just want to let people know, I've had the privilege and honor of seeing BCYF from an idea, something that people kind of talked about, watching it formulate in real time and watching some of the dopest people on the planet put it together and make it real. And I could say with utmost confidence, it is one of a kind. It is one of the only institutions of its kind in the country. And there is powerful work happening, not just from the people in BCYF, but the grantees at BCYF. And we got to make sure that BCYF success is directly linked to your success as a person running an organization like Donna that wants to get paid for the work that they do, that wants to get supported for the work that they do, and is trying to navigate the sometimes treacherous nonprofit sector and philanthropic sector. We are your Sherpa, your guide, if you will, to help you get from kind of working on those things and thinking about those things, actually doing them in real time. And I just want to shout out to everybody on this call who has been such a dope contributor to BCYF's success as an organization and building it in the future. And I'm very excited hearing what everyone has to say this evening. All right, Cameron, I think you have a question. I just see it in the chat. Have you all thought about creating a paid fellowship for grassroots business owners? Maybe it could be under BCred. Definitely could be helpful.
That sounds like an incubation idea. And thank you so much for sharing that. We're definitely going to be out in community. The People's Assembly is one great place, but that's not the last place that you'll be able to share ideas. But ideas like that are the kind of ideas that we need, those innovative ideas that share how we can be that resource to the city. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll definitely collect that idea. Thank you, Cameron.
All right. I think we are just about going to wrap up with tonight's Q&A session. Before we formally end the Q&A portion of tonight, and I pass it to Ms. Dion Cartwright to close us out, I want to remind you to, one, go to the BCYF website at bcyfund.org and register for the People's Assembly. You can come virtually. If you can't show up in person, you can always come virtually. We'd love to see you there. That is on the 21st. All you have to do is go to the website, register, you'll get the Zoom link, and you can join us virtually. But if you'd like, I prefer that we see your beautiful face in person at Cherry Hill Elementary Middle on the 25th at the in-person People's Assembly. And that is going to be from 10 to 1. And again, lunch and breakfast will be provided at no cost to you, And childcare. These are wonderful opportunities. Now you have no excuse. Now it's like, man, I'm going to be hungry. Oh man, I can't find a sitter. Now we thought about that. We're working with excellent vendors who are going to be providing those services for people who attend. So if you're a person who's never interacted, never met us in person, hasn't really heard about the Youth Fund, it's a perfect opportunity for you to meet everyone in person in real time and to join the conversation and to give your input on the future of the Youth Fund. So I want to make sure I remind all 16 of you that are still here with us this evening to just go to the website and register, and we hope to see you there. And I see no more questions. I
just
see no
wanna
more
jump in
questions.
right before Dion closes us out, if we're going to close, but I want to make sure that I mention that part of this work, you mentioned the team, and there is a robust team here. And from today to the end of this calendar year, we have a plan to hire about 25 individuals to come and work at BCYF. We're looking for folks who believe in the values, have alignment of values with us, folks who have practitioner experience, so young people who've worked with in grassroots spaces, people who understand the dynamic and the landscape of Baltimore City's youth sector. So if that's you, please continue to check out our website. We have positions posted right now. We are hiring right now, and we will continue to hire folks through the end of this calendar year. So please be in touch. There's lots of opportunities to be a part, share these positions with others. You know the folks in community who should be here inside of BCYF working on your behalf. So please help us to connect with those folks as well.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Alicia.
Alicia.
That's such a great way to end the evening. Thank you to the staff and the board members who participated in tonight's meeting. Thank you to all the members of the public for joining us. Please stay engaged, follow us on social media, follow us, sign up for our listserv, and really learn more about our work. Visit bcyffund.org for more information and for all of the resources that you heard about tonight. Also, please join our email list to get additional information about BCYF's ongoing technical assistance and training sessions and the great opportunities that we'll have moving forward in the future. Our next board meeting, which is a public meeting, is on June 28th at 6:30 p.m. We welcome you all to join us, ask your questions, get excited about all of the things that we have already done, but also what we have coming forward. Have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you guys again in the future. Good night.